And also, terrific. And if folks can put their name and organization that they're with in the chat, that'll help us all know sort of who's in our learning community today. In our high road work, we always recognize that practitioners are experts. You're all the experts in this work, and so we learn from each other. And we really appreciate the insight that each of us brings to the discussion. So today we're going to start, today our topic is recruiting in tight labor markets. And what we'll do is we'll have some presentations from some subject matter experts. We're going to start with one of our colleagues at the UC Berkeley Labor Center, Enrique Lopezlira. And Enrique is the director of the Low Wage Work Program at the UC Berkeley Labor Center. And Enrique is going to give us an overview of what's happening in labor markets. The impetus for this webinar today was a set of requests that we were hearing from our High Road Partnership colleagues saying, you know, some of us are having some challenges recruiting. What's going on with this great resignation? What's really happening in labor markets? We'd like to, you know, really understand what that's about, and then hear from our fellow High Road practitioners about the strategies they use for recruitment in a labor market like this. And so we're going to start there. We'll start with Enrique, and then we'll move on to some practitioner experts, and then we'll finish up with some questions and answers. So please feel free throughout the webinar to put your questions in the chat as they come up. And then when we get to the Q&A session, you can either put questions in the chat or you can write stack, and we'll call on you so you can ask your question live. So that's where we'll start. And Enrique, I'm going to kick it over to you. And if you could talk to us a little bit about the myths and realities of this great resignation thing and what's really happening in labor markets, that would be great.
Great. Thanks, Pam. Thanks for inviting me. And good morning to everyone. As Pam mentioned, I'm the director of the Low Wage Program at the UC Berkeley Labor Center. I'm a labor economist by training, and Pam asked me to just talk a little bit about, you know, the great resignation and what's really happening with labor markets. And I say labor markets because sometimes people talk about the labor market, but there's many markets within the labor market, and they're all a little different. But just in general, what's happening nationally in California. And so I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about that, and then I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. And Pam and her team will have the slides, and she can share them with folks after the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get started. All right, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Great, excellent. All right, so want to talk about the tightness of the labor market and what's happening. So you know, I'm going to give you first the takeaways in case something happens to the computer or whatever. At least you have the punchlines, and then I'll go through some of the evidence. I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about a dangerous narrative that's around right now as we're dealing with inflation. You'll see that in a minute, what I'm talking about. And then talk a little bit about how these are opportunities to galvanize workers to organize. And we're seeing some of that already, and it'd be great to keep the momentum going, and then implications for workers and employers. And like I said, I'm happy to take questions if time permits after. So the takeaways are that we do have a tight, you know, labor market in both the US and California, and that's consistent with past economic recoveries. Maybe the degree of tightness is a little bit more acute this time around, but we tend to see labor markets tighten after you come out of a downturn. The other key takeaway is I think the great resignation is not the correct term. I prefer another term called the great reshuffling, and I'll share some data on that. And then also show you that there's large differences by groups. There's many ways you can parse groups, but if you look at, I'm just going to look in terms of age and education and industry to show you some of those differences. And then again, I think there's a great opportunity to continue to galvanize workers. We've seen the momentum continue with the Apple store in Maryland, I believe voted to unionize, and Apple's not going to start negotiating with those workers. And then the last takeaway, and I think is a really important one, is that we have seen some very much needed wage growth for workers, but especially at the lower end of the wage distribution, and that is great. But this higher wages are not driving the inflation that consumers are feeling, and I think that's the dangerous narrative that's happening right now, is that inflation will not subside until wage growth subsides, and I think that's a wrong way to think about things. But anyway, those are the key takeaways. So, the Great Resignation, this is a term that was coined by psychologist Andy Klotz in May of 2021. And so the media has focused a lot on what we call quit rates in the data. And in the data, a quit is an employee who leaves their job voluntarily, either to take another job, look for another job while they're unemployed, or they drop out of the labor market altogether. I think the problem is that people, in the media especially, just think of quit rates as that last portion of the definition, drop out of the labor market. And that's actually not what's happening. People are quitting their jobs in high numbers, but not to leave the labor market altogether. So this is the graph for quit data in the US since 2018. This data started being released in 2000, so it's fairly recent data. And what caught everyone's attention was that in November of 2021, we had the highest number of quits in history since the data started, which was 4.5 million workers back in November of 2021, and that's when the media really started focusing on, well, workers are leaving their jobs and leaving the workforce. But the JOLTS report, this job opening and labor turnover report, not only reports quits, it also reports hires. Workers quit these jobs, but not to leave the labor force, but to go somewhere else, presumably take advantage of the fact that when there's a tight labor market, there's better pay, or conditions are improved by employers to attract workers. And so I like the term great reshuffling coined by labor economist Aaron Dubay, who was actually a fellow at the Labor Center a few years ago. And so if you look at not just quits, but hires, you can see that the workers are leaving, but when in November, when the quits rate was high, there was also a spike in hires as well. So workers were leaving to find these better opportunities, to take advantage of better opportunities. So it's more of a reshuffling rather than a resignation. If you look at California, it's sort of the same thing. There's been an increase in quits in the last part of 2021, but there's also been an increase in hires in the last part of 2021. And then both those series have sort of started declining a little bit in 2022. Part of that is because workers, there's more uncertainty now about what's going to happen with interest rates and inflation, and so some workers are staying put, and so the quit rates has gone down. It has gone down in California, but also hires because there's not enough workers for the job openings out there. Just more evidence of this great reshuffling. If you look at administrative data, particularly unemployment insurance claims, most of the workers who were laid off during the pandemic ended up being recalled by the same employer. And those workers who were laid off and were not recalled by the same employer ended up taking jobs in the same industry. So it's more of a reshuffling, again, rather than a resignation. This is a little hard to see, but this is a study from the California Policy Lab looking at administrative data for California, and the CPL is another center within our institute here. And you can see that 59.1% of those who were recalled by the same employer. So almost 2/3 of those workers went back to work for the same employer. If you look in terms of industry, most workers return to the same industry, right? It's almost 3/4 on average of workers who return. Doesn't matter how you break it by demographics, they tend to return to the same industry. So it's more of a reshuffling rather than a resignation. Like I said at the beginning of this presentation, there are large differences by group, and that this also ties into the pandemic itself. The pandemic it affected the economy as a whole, but it didn't affect everybody the same. Some workers were affected more severely than others. And part of, in particular, like most recessions, Black workers, young workers, those least educated workers were hit the hardest. In this case, the reason is because the industries that shut down, leisure and hospitality, retail, those industries are overrepresented by these type, workers in these low wage occupations, and so they were impacted the hardest. Now, given that these jobs tend to be low pay and also low quality, then we would expect that these industries would show a higher rate of switching happening. And again, if you look at industry quit rates by industry, you can see that retail and hospitality and leisure are up there with some of the highest quit rates, along with manufacturing. So it sort of makes sense that these workers were hit hard during the pandemic. These are low quality jobs, so they're looking for better opportunities somewhere else, but they tend to go back to the same industry. Now, the problem with the JOLTS data is that it doesn't allow you to do analysis by demographics, but the Federal Reserve San Francisco Bank did some analysis of job switchers, and it also shows disparities by groups. So you can see that some of the highest quit rates are in the younger people, 16 to 24. And again, they tend to be in these kind of low wage occupations. And so you would expect a higher quit rate, and you see that they do have a higher slope, a steeper slope than some of the other groups with higher quit rates. Again, if you look at education breakdowns, you can see that those with the least education, less than a high school diploma, also have a much higher quit rate than some of the other workers. So this is all consistent with the tightness of labor markets after the pandemic and people switching to take advantage of better quality jobs and better pay somewhere else. Now, one of the narratives that is false from the Great Resignation is that workers don't want to work anymore. You see a lot of people say that in the media that, workers don't want to work anymore, they just want to stay home. And that is not true. The data does not support that at all. It is true that the share of the population that was either working or looking for work dropped during the pandemic, but those folks have largely returned. We saw lots of older workers, 55 and up, who retired during the pandemic. They were afraid of the risk to their health, and so they decided that it was time to retire. But even some of those workers are coming back now that things have gotten a bit better. The other point that's important is that the pandemic, what it did was magnify existing problems, and it exacerbated some problems that were already there. So the pandemic highlighted the crisis of care that we already had in this country. And we saw that with lots of women having to drop out of the workforce to care for either kids out of school or elderly relatives who, when the adult centers closed. And then the other thing is that we've had this aging of the US workforce, that we don't have enough young people coming into the marketplace to replace the fact that we're becoming an older nation and have been for a while. So these are things that were exacerbated by the pandemic, that were already problems before, and there were going to be bigger problems in the future. So just to show you some data for California, you can see that most of the workers have returned. The one difference is young workers, right? They're still about 2% below before the pandemic. That's about 45,000 workers in California, so it's not a whole lot. So largely workers have returned. If you look at the US, for older workers, you can see that there's been a big spike in workers coming back into the workforce, older workers at the beginning of 2022. And the Wall Street Journal had some analysis showing that those who retired were coming back out of retirement of a 3% rate. So we're seeing workers are coming back. Workers do want to work. It's a myth that they don't. One of the problems that people also don't think about is that we've had a huge drop in migration. It started in 2016 because at the federal level, some of the policies of that administration were not friendly to immigrants. Then the pandemic hit, which caused a lot of people to go back home, and it made it hard for people to come back. And so we've had some pretty low migration. And if you don't have young workers, if you don't have native young workers to replace the older workers, the only place you can get them is from abroad. And so if we have low migration from abroad and not enough young workers, then you're going to have this problem of a labor shortage. And again, these are things that were happening already before the pandemic just sped this up. So we do have tight labor markets. The number of workers per job opening is lower than before the pandemic, but this has allowed the power of workers to increase, and they can bargain for better pay and quality. We've all heard of anecdotal evidence of employers giving bonuses and other benefits like tuition reimbursement to try to hire workers. In California, you can see that the job openings per worker is higher than before the pandemic. Pam, I don't let me know how much time I have. I'm almost done, but I want to make sure that I'm.
No, you're in good shape, Enrique. I think it's great. And we've got a few extra minutes since Tonya won't be able to join us.
Okay, great. Thank you. So you can see that there are more job openings than workers right now in the US, and actually in California and in the US. And then this has allowed wages to increase. So this graph here is from the Atlanta Federal Reserve. And you can see that those who switch jobs have seen a much higher bump up in their wages than overall workers. So it's paid for workers to switch to take advantage of better job opportunities out there. But this leads me to the other dangerous narrative. And the danger of this is that it's been perpetuated even by economists on the so-called left, that inflation is being driven by these wage growths. And unless the wage growth subsides, inflation will not subside. And that's a false narrative. The inflation that we're experiencing today is a result of various factors. The structure of markets today, where it's not very competitive, it's one or two major employers in most industries would drive these policies called monopsony. The supply chain disruptions from the pandemic that's still happening. You can see that again if you drive by any port town. You can see the number of ships still out there waiting to be to dock and have the goods transported to the stores. The conflict in Ukraine with the oil especially, and some other raw materials. But wage growth is not one of them. In fact, if you look at the data, wage growth has been below inflation, has been trailing inflation. So if anything, wage growth has been dampening inflation pressures because it's not moving as high as inflation, and workers are losing that purchasing power because wages are not keeping up with inflation, even though we've seen wage growth is not enough to address the price issue. So this is a graph from Indeed. You can see that the percent of employees with wage gains exceeding inflation is pretty low compared to other years. So wages are growing much less than inflation. So they're not driving inflation. If anything, they're dampening inflation. And so that's something to keep in mind. The tightness of the labor market has been good for workers. We've seen workers galvanize, and even the public, we see the largest public support for unions since the 60s. In 2021, according to Cornell, there was about 178 strikes. Like I said, the recent efforts by Starbucks and Amazon and Apple show that employers continue to fight to organize and engage in collective bargaining. The problem is on the policy side, the national policies that could help workers who are trying to improve their working conditions has stalled. The federal minimum wage hasn't moved. The PRO Act, which would allow it would make it easier for workers to form unions and bargain collectively has stalled. So there's still much work on the policy side left to do. For workers and employers, the implications of this tight labor market is that, employees should continue to take advantage of wage improvements and quality improvements in other jobs. If you can switch jobs, the data shows that you're going to do much better than if you stay in your job right now. But also the momentum needs to keep going for workers to continue to gain power. Even if you don't have a union, we saw self-organizing. I can't remember what I think it was Starbucks. One of the recent unionization efforts was just the workers themselves. There was no union that helped them out. So self-organizing is good. And then I think employers just need to not only think about recruiting, but retaining employees. It's not, higher pay is great, but there's a lot of problems still with many jobs, on certain work schedules, lack of healthcare benefits, lack of retirement benefits, no paid sick leave and so forth. Those are all things that employers should look at, not just wages, to help retain the employees they are recruiting. And then, like I always say this, is that when employers see employees as partners and an asset, the business does better, workers do better, their families do better, and rather than seeing them as a cost that needs to be minimized somehow. Anyway, I'll stop there and take questions that you may have.
That's extraordinary, Enrique. Thanks so much for kind of setting that table for all of us and putting us in a position to have that information. If there are any quick questions for Enrique, go ahead and put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. And then we'll switch, and Enrique will also be able to answer questions at the end of the presentation with our other presenters too. Might take a minute for us to process that and come up with those questions. Okay. Great. Okay. So that was a great overview of really what's happening in our labor markets, and now what we want to do is switch to some conversation about how specific HRTPs have gone about recruiting in the past, what their best practices are recruiting that we can then begin to apply in these tight labor markets. We've got a terrific panel, each of whom has a little bit different perspective and deep expertise and best practices to bring to us today. We'd like to start with Armando Loza. Armando is the Impact Manager and Assistant Director at the Miguel Contreras Foundation, Labor One Stop. And Miguel has a lot of deep expertise. One stream of that has to do with recruiting from AJCCs, because I think he's got some history, a deep history working with AJCCs. So Armando, let me turn it over to you.
Good morning, all. Thank you very much for that introduction. Yeah, I do have a little bit of a bias, so forgive me for that. Let me know if you can see the screen. I always like to double check.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so yes, thank you, Pamela, for that introduction, and Enrique, thank you for that information. It's great to hear, some of those myths being broken. And so on that note, I'd like to break the myth of the America's Job Centers of California. Once again, I do have to let everyone know I was a director of an America's Job Center of California for about 5 years, so there's a bit of a bias, but hopefully I can provide some information today that'll make it easier for you to work with your local America's Job Center, One Stop, Work Source Center, whatever they're called in your region. So a little bit about me. I just turned 43, so I can officially say I've had 25 years in workforce experience. I started as a youth worker in the city of Huntington Park at Hub City's Career Center, which is still an AJCC, and cut to more than 25 years later, I'm now an impact director at the Miguel Contreras Foundation, and I love working at the foundation for several reasons, but more so being able to align union employment apprenticeship programs with the workforce system. And so this is primarily my role, is to create and to build the programs that are currently there. Once again, prior to my role here, I was a director at the Rancho Dominguez Americas Job Center of California. This is one of my favorite quotes when it comes to partnership. And the reason why I wanted to introduce the presentation with this quote is because it takes several steps to create a partnership. But with the Americas Job Center, it's almost multiplied. It's almost it's on steroids, right? For several reasons. But I'll get into those reasons. But coming together is a beginning, keeping together is a progress, and working together is success. Because at the end of the day, specifically when it comes to working with agencies like the Americas Job Center of California, who have several enrollment processes, for lack of a better word. We have to understand the reasons why. We have to understand, the benefits and also some of the headaches that we can have. And I'm speaking on both sides as a former director and as an impact manager. So just a little bit of background. I'm probably speaking to the choir, but I'm going to speak primarily around the AJCCs in LA County and the city of Los Angeles, the workforce centers. Most of the work that we're doing with our current workforce programs, primarily our HRTP program, is with the county of Los Angeles. But just so y'all know, here in Los Angeles County, we have 19 AJCC locations. And I wanted to bring this out. So just in case some of you are not aware of our system and the number of AJCCs within our area. And so we're able to work with several AJCCs in our program. And in fact, all three programs that we run are working with different AJCCs. So it just depends on the region of where the work is being done. And so that's the beauty of being able to, if you have an employer in a certain location, you're able to identify, hopefully within your space, an AJCC one-stop center, workforce center within the local area that you can then begin to build this type of relationship with. As you know, the AJCC has several resources, they have several in-house partners, and I'll get into that in my next slide. So when we talk about recruitment and we talk about leveraging resources, it begins with, starting the conversation. Ultimately, that is one of our goals, is to be able to access participants that are enrolled with the AJCC. Depending on if they're a comprehensive or a satellite AJCC, they're enrolling in excess of about 1,500 participants per year. That includes opportunity youth, that includes adult dislocated workers, and that includes some of the partner agencies involved within the AJCC system. So you potentially have access to recruiting for your HRTPs to a large pool of applicants that are enrolling in the AJCCs for several reasons. A, they want to have access to employment opportunities, but also it's part of a, I don't want to say mandate, but a requirement for EDB. If you are unemployment, if you've been dislocated, you are required to register at an AJCC so they can help find employment. So when I talk about co-enrollment and some of the benefits in working with AJCCs, I always keep recruiting in mind. And so our first thing is co-enrollment. And when I say co-enrollment, I mean co-everything. Co-enrollment is not just co-case management. It's not just enrolling them in both programs. I'm talking about co-meetings, co-events, co-lunches. I'm talking about everything. So when you're trying to build a relationship with an AJCC, because there's so many processes and so many headaches, you want to get to know each other. You want to get to know each other's programs. You want to, come to these opportunities where when you're going to start having those challenges regarding paperwork and timelines and all that good stuff, at least you've built a relationship by this point. And so when we talk about co-enrollment, you're just not leveraging resources, but you're also leveraging the opportunity to build a relationship, not only with the participant, but also with other partners that are involved. Leverage is is another major reason why MCF has decided to work closely with AJCCs, both financial and non-financial leverage that they provide with whether it's training, supportive services, space, access to their participants, and also access to the partners. So most AJCCs have several partners that are in-house. In this case, from my experience at the Rancho Dominguez AJCC, we had Department of Probation in-house. We had education, which in that space was 5 keys. Obviously, EDD, the Employment Development Department, Department of Rehab, and several other partners that were in-house. In addition to having these partners in-house, we also created a monthly partners meeting. And this gave us an opportunity to talk about all of the programs that each partner has. And to this day, we still meet with our partners at Rancho Dominguez AJCC. Gives us an opportunity to share our flyers, share our programs, share some data. And it really starts, seeing that those fruits of labor come to fruition. So these are the 3 main components that when it comes to recruitment, that we focus on. So we're able to access participants or enrollees from our partners. We're able to leverage the non-financial and financial resources from these partners. Once again, whether it's promoting our programs, being invited to events, coming to the table, to talk about program design and implementation, and co-everything. It's not just co-enrollment. Here are some steps that we usually take when we're meeting with the new AJCC. Once again, I mentioned that all of our programs, we're working with a different AJCC. For our electric bus manufacturing HRTP program, we're working with the Pomona Valley AJCC. For our healthcare program, we're working with the Southeast LA AJCC. And for our logistics and transportation program, we're working with the Rancho Dominguez AJCC. So all AJCCs are different, but they all have similarities. So once you start working with one, you'll start knowing the language, you start knowing the lingo, you start knowing the processes, and then it'll be easier for you to approach another AJCC, show them the work that you've been doing with the current AJCC in terms of placements, enrollments, leverage, and the sell it becomes a lot more easier. So first step is program alignment. Make sure it's outcome driven. AJCCs have goals, placement goals, spending goals, enrollment goals, just like our HRTP program or other workforce programs that we have at MCF. Create a realistic MOU. Make it simple. Not with all this language that's going to scare people away. Just in our case, we do co-case management. We provide stipends. They provide training. At the end of the day, there's a lot more to it that we do as a partnership, but for the most part, have something on paper that you can, at very minimum, have a guide to when you are working these programs. Create a shared space. I mean that both physical and virtual. We have had a lot of success when we're actually in-house. We're actually there. They see our faces. We're bringing resources. One example is at the Rancho Dominguez AJCC, we've created a training space. We use one of their old garages. And so they see us there all the time. And we're thinking of building out another space at the Southeast LA satellite office at the Richard and Slauson. But after seeing our space in Rancho Dominguez, they were like, we want to be able to do that as well. So if we wouldn't have committed to having a physical space, it would have been a lot more difficult for us to demonstrate the work that is being done. So create shared spaces, something that you're comfortable in working with these partners. Create and share performance tools, so that everyone's on the same page. How many enrollments, how many placements, how much leverage are we trying to accomplish? Follow up and follow through. So there are partners. We ensure that we are following up with activities, with tasks, whether it's sharing documents, etc. So just wanted to show a little bit of the work that we've been doing and some of the benefits of working with an AJCC. So we currently are running 3 programs at Miguel Contreras Foundation. And those are enrolled participants. The next ones are the co-enrolled participants. So every participant that has been co-enrolled with an AJCC into WIOA. We have a total of 133 co-enrollments. We did have a few that were not interested or were not eligible for WIOA. So not everyone was enrolled. And out of the 133 co-enrollments, we've had 82 placements. A few cohorts are currently happening now, but we are, hopefully that we're hopeful that our placements are about 95%. And so that is a benefit to the AJCC. That is a benefit to Miguel Contreras Foundation. And so this is where it's at. In terms of leverage, financial leverage, we've been able to leverage over $350,000 with the AJCCs, primarily in training, about $176,000 in training and stipends. So that is provided by the AJCCs for our youth programs, or provided by MCFs using state monies and private monies as well. Other leverage is transportation and uniforms for our participants. So at the end of the day, this is where the numbers are at. We're talking about placements, high percentage placements. MCF has created these workforce programs, working with employers who are represented by unions. And so AJCCs are really excited about that opportunity, and also the leverage that we bring to the table. But more importantly is creating that partnership, beyond the partnership, creating a friendship. I know it sounds a little cliche, but at the end of the day, once you're in the trenches, getting these enrollments, verifications, and everything else that is needed, that goes a long way. So thank you.
Wow, Armando, that's just terrific. Thank you for that really clear vision of how we can work with AJCCs. And I see there's a quick question from Michael Bell in the chat. What time frame is it? And I think that was referring maybe to your by the numbers slide. Was that within a year or within some space of time?
Yes, so that's approximately about a year. I started with the foundation in February, so we were pretty much launching everything by like May or June of last year. So that's it's really quick. Yeah, it's really quick. Once again, having the experience made it a lot easier, but they can turn these programs fairly quick.
That's great. Thank you, Armando. We'll follow up at the end with additional questions. So our next presenter is Peter Simon, and Peter has a ton of experience in this work, a lot of which comes from the community college perspective. Peter will tell you a little bit about his background in community colleges, but he's also currently the principal of the High Road Alliance, and he also works very, very closely with one of our HRTPs, California Transit Works. So Peter's going to give us a couple of different perspectives. Peter? You're on mute, my friend.
Thank you for the introduction. Nice to see all of you. A really quick introduction to me. I'm a retired, many years community college CTE dean, so I come out of the community college world. But what I'm going to say here in a minute has to do with how, even though a lot of you might partner with community colleges are really terrible at recruitment. Here I actually have a PowerPoint. It's not nearly as fancy as the last one. Here, let's see, share. Can you see that? There we go.
Yep.
I just, to finish my introduction, after working at the community colleges for many years, and I was involved with a lot of partnerships with, and I was also on the Oakland Workforce Board. So I was very involved with working with unions and workforce boards, which is a little unusual for community college people. I worked for a number of years with the Career Ladders Project out of Oakland. Some of you might know those folks. And the last year with Jenny Malika, we formed the High Road Alliance, and we do a lot of work around apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship. We work with adult schools and community colleges, do a lot of direct technical assistance, but also do grant writing and kind of strategic planning. So it's all about equitable access to good jobs. I thought I'd start out, I had told I was have 10 minutes, so I thought I'll just put everything I want to say on one slide to start with, which is if there's anything else you remember about what I say, it's these 3 points, which is everyone's going to say it's really about partnerships, and that's really true with community colleges, and I'll talk about that in a second. I thought just to kind of highlight the fact that it's not, this may sound heretical, but it's really not so much about designing the most perfect training program, but it's really about identifying and removing the barriers for people to participate in your training program, because that's often what gets in the way in terms of people's schedules, lives, and economics. And I just had to include a favorite quote from one of my old teachers, which is one of my guiding principles, which is you move the target over to hit the arrow. Anyway, so let me just move this thing out of the way. So in terms of partnerships, again, even though I spent several decades working in the community college world, I think I'm on safe ground by saying community colleges are notoriously bad at recruitment. I'd be curious to know if we could have a raise of hands, which we can't, of how many of you out in the HRTP world are working with community colleges. I have worked with a number. I was part of the technical assistance team when they first started the High Road Training Partnerships. And in that role with Rob Gamble from Mission College, we put together a PowerPoint, which I'd be glad to share in the chat, called How to Work with Community Colleges, because a lot of people out there talk about how it's really hard somehow to work with colleges because they're not that flexible. So the key for community colleges really is to work with others. Like Armando was saying in terms of the workforce system, that what's really striking is even after several decades of WIA and WIOA, there's really not a huge amount of collaboration between community colleges and the workforce system in terms of leveraging those resources. Obviously, community colleges need to work with unions and employers and industry organizations, CBOs, and I want to highlight the importance of working with adult education consortia. And why do I say that? I'm going to give an example in a second here of doing that, but I'll just say, and I think just on a mercenary level, that almost all funding opportunities now ask the question, and I know that's really true for the High Road Training Partnerships, is they say, can you specifically say how you're going to reach and serve underserved, or I think they call it priority populations or target populations? And the fact of the matter is that adult education consortia, and I say consortia, not adult ed schools, because on paper at least, all adult schools now are partnered with community colleges, and that's why they call them a consortium. And maybe you all know that, that's old hat, but I just want to say that oftentimes they still don't collaborate within those consortia. So, but you really need to think about it as a continuum of adult school and community college. But why adult schools? Adult schools, number one, are a main a main avenue to reaching many of those underserved populations. When you're talking about the demographics, particularly in California, a lot of those most impacted by the pandemic and the great reshuffling, as Enrique called it, are low-wage workers and immigrants. And that's exactly who is served by adult schools. So if you want to address that question when you write your next grant, I'd really recommend, if you aren't already, to get to know and to work with your local adult education consortium. Also, one thing that people complain about community colleges a lot is that they're not flexible. And the beauty of adult schools is they are very flexible, that if you need a course created, they can do it in short order. Whereas I think those of you who have worked with community colleges know it can take up to a year to get a new class created. I may be, again, preaching to the choir here. Let me quickly go to the next slide. Jumping ahead, I was asked also to share my partner and I, Jenny Malik, High Road Alliance, in partnership with the Foundation for California Community Colleges, last year produced the Equitable Apprenticeship Toolkit. And this is really, hopefully not like a sales promo here, but because it's free actually. And I'll also put the link in the chat. But the focus on the toolkit ostensibly is apprenticeship, but the more we work with organizations in this toolkit, it's pretty clear that a lot of the tools are great for any kind of program having to do with workforce development, okay? And we have, and one thing I just wanted to point out, which is kind of key to the toolkit, but I think just really important in terms of the whole issue of equity when you talk about the three legs of high road training partnerships being job quality, equity, and climate resilience. When people talk about equity, they usually talk about access and recruitment. But one thing that we have really learned talking to a lot of people in the field is access and recruitment is just really one part of equity. Because what happens, and this is again true not just for apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship programs as we show here, but it's really about almost all workforce development, is that it's not just a matter of having an open door and saying, come on in, because equity and sort of the issues that knock people off the road, the career path, are at all, as we show in this framework, are at all stages. So you can train people, but then if they're unable to get to work because they don't have transportation, or childcare, which is a huge one in a lot of industries. We work a lot with the construction industries. That's a huge issue. Or there's a whole myriad number of issues, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So I just wanted to show that we see this as a sort of a continuous revisiting, continuous improvement model of really looking at, I'm going to show you then, the toolkit has 14 tools. The first section of tools are information gathering tools. And I guess my other piece of advice, based on, again, our experience and talking to a lot of people, is even if you've been at this a while, it's really good to do more homework. And really, if you're talking about recruitment and equity, that you really have to understand the specifics of your local community. And you may think you know that, but it's really good to revisit it. And then we, of course, have a number of action planning tools. And I just want to reiterate that the focus of the toolkit is apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship, and it's valuable, we have found and been told, for almost any workforce development program. This is a flyer for a pre-apprenticeship program that is part of a high road training partnership in Northern California. It's the partnership between Golden Gate Transit, and Amalgamated Transit Union Local 135, and also now College of Marin and Santa Rosa Junior College Adult Education Program. And why am I showing this? We have a whole PowerPoint about this, but I'm supposed to limit my talk to 10 minutes here. We use the toolkit to develop this pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship program. And I'm just bringing this up now as an example because when we started, we did this sort of research about who is not getting hired at Golden Gate Transit. And they're complaining we desperately need drivers. They've cut their service by 50% because they don't have enough drivers to drive their buses. So they're eager to kind of move the target over to hit the arrow in this case. So in the process of using the toolkit, we identified that the biggest obstacle to employment as a bus driver was what they call the entrance examination, which was a combination of aptitude and sort of a personality test. And over 60% of people who took that test failed, and a high proportion of those people were people of color and low-income people. So the transit agency, as we developed the pre-apprenticeship to address what you need to become a bus driver in their agency, was so impressed with the preparation, they said, okay, we're going to just eliminate the exam entirely. So people who complete this pre-apprenticeship do not have to take that test, which is a huge win for everybody, including the bus company and the participants. In terms of the demographics in their community, both particularly in Sonoma County, is that this program, the pre-apprenticeship, is going to be offered in a bilingual format, and the outreach is going to be done by people who are completely bilingual, English and Spanish. And they've also identified another barrier, which was the driving age. They had required people to have, I think, 7 years of a clean driving record to get this job. And they went, that's kind of ridiculous. So we're going to reduce it to 3 years. That way we can hire people coming out of high school and reach opportunity youth. So just a quick example. And again, this is a high road training partnership right here, doing recruitment to a target population. I'll leave it at that. I could go on and on, but that's it.
Peter, that's really excellent. Thank you so much for that, and for the tools that come with it. So
yeah, I'll put the toolkit in the chat.
That's fantastic, and we'll post that on the HRTP portal. And of course, folks can reach out to Peter as well.
Yeah, I'm happy. We talk about it all the time. So
great.
Happy to talk. Thank you.
Thanks for that perspective. So next, we're going to move on to Susanna Petrosian. Susanna is the Senior Director of the Education Fund Programs at the Center for Caregiver Advancement. And she's going to knock your socks off. We spoke with Susanna a few weeks ago, and she knocked our socks off about some extraordinary work that the center is doing around mass recruitment and enrollment processes and tools. This is amazing stuff. Susanna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Pab. Good morning, everybody. I'll share my presentation right now. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
Beautiful. To start off, I think it would be helpful maybe to give background information about our organization. Center for Caregiver Advancement is technically two nonprofits under the same umbrella. We have two sets of workers that we serve: IHSS providers, also known as home care workers, and also nursing home workers across the state of California. They are all members of SEIU 2015. They're unionized workers, and we work in the communities that they actually live. Specifically, my presentation today will focus on our HRTP program known as Caregiver Resiliency Teams Project. And it's a first of its kind in the nation, emergency preparedness training for caregivers. And we're really excited that we're going through multiple rapid cycle feedbacks to really create a model that our sister training funds, sister organizations, and just any other organization that's interested in bringing this training to their communities and workers, we can have a model that we can share. And our program, it's, to address both climate and non-climate related disasters that impact the workers that we serve and the communities that we work with. There was a need, as you all know, living in California, extreme weather, wildfires, power outages, those are things that are pretty common. And we're in the summer now. I'm sure some of us are already feeling the heat in the areas that we live. And especially the workers that we serve, they expressed an urgent need for this program, and they found themselves increasingly in the first responder role, not only for themselves and their family members, but also the consumers and the residents that they serve. However, they were taking on this role of as a first responder. However, they didn't have sufficient training. And so that's where our training comes in. And our program is for both nursing home and IHSS workers. And the target geographies is across the state of California. On the nursing home side of the work, we're a labor management partnership. So we have relationship with nursing home operators and employers across the state who are participating in our program. And on the IHSS side, we serve home care workers across different counties. And so we are targeting communities that are in HRTP's priority population. They live in the neighborhoods that have high population burden and high population characteristics. Our goal is to train about 500 workers total by end of the grant period. And we are offering the training in 2 languages, English and Spanish. And we have a 6-week training that we developed. And this is some of the topics that we are covering. Now, this is the original 6 modules. We completed our first pilot recently. Our second pilot is starting this July. And then after 2 rapid cycle feedbacks, maybe some of these may be slightly adjusted. We have subject matter experts, internal staff, instructors who are really providing a lot of robust feedback in order for us to, update our curriculum, make sure it needs the really tailoring to the workers that we serve. Now, the recruiting, the topic that we're talking about today, how do we get caregivers interested in this training? Earlier, we talked about great reshuffling, great resignation. That was something that impacted the nursing home industry greatly. To this day, that has not really changed. The employers that we work with are struggling a lot. There's a huge shortage of CNAs in nursing home. And so having workers who have multiple jobs, have a huge workload under a lot of stress, we come in and tell them, come take a class with us, which is not mandatory at your facility. So there are barriers to getting them into the class. And earlier, Peter talked about we need to reduce those barriers. And that's exactly what we are trying to do, or else we wouldn't have anyone in our classes. Now, what really connected with our workers? We built in our proposal stipends. We are working with workers who are low-wage workers. Oftentimes they take trainings that are not compensated or don't end up, they don't end up getting a wage increase or a promotion for having those certifications or trainings. And so we wanted to ensure that the skills they gained and the hours that they spent in training were compensated. And so we built in a more than $500 worth of stipend per worker. We are also offering emergency kits. For home care workers, they really love, because there aren't any mandatory trainings for workers, for home care workers, they love walking away from a training with a certificate. So we have a CPR, AED, and first aid certificate for home care workers. And for our CNAs who really value continuing education credits and they needed to maintain their licenses, we got approval through CDPH. In addition to, multiple incentives, there was also an interest just in general emergency preparedness. I talked about living in California. We're constantly faced with a variety of climate and non-climate related events. And it was just a need for skills as caregivers, right? They wanted to have this skill to take care of themselves, their families, their consumers, their residents. There was also the need for personal safety, right? Like they're hungry for knowledge. And passing on what they learned to people that they receive, that they provide care, and also their family members. As some of you may know, caregivers are mostly women. And we know that when you educate a woman, the knowledge doesn't just stay with them, right? They pass it on to their family members, their community. So the impact is so much larger when that one woman in a community is educated. And then connecting with fellow caregivers. Caregiving is sometimes isolating, especially for home care workers who work with on a one-on-one setting with their consumer. They like to share their experiences, bring their different perspectives during class. And really, because it's a 6-week class, it deepens the connection between caregivers and also, I would say, with our organization. We designed this program to be live instructor led and completely 100% on Zoom. Prior to the pandemic, our workers were not comfortable with technology. When we would host computer classes, some of them would be scared to even touch a computer, thinking they would break it. The silver lining, I would say, for us and for the workers we serve with the pandemic was that they became a lot more comfortable with technology. And so we utilized that opportunity to make sure that we continued and provided them online opportunities. Even with Zoom, they're able to do active guided discussions. They have instructor support, and there's a high student engagement. Now, our recruiting, what were some of the challenges and solutions that we came up with to make sure that we are on track to meet our HRTP goals? The first one, I would say it's a new program, right? And we all know who are HRTP recipients, there are a lot of program requirements, probably more than some of us are used to. So what we did, especially to get our recruiters comfortable, was we created an HRTP specific recruitment manual. We wanted to provide foundational knowledge, information, tips, do's and don'ts, all kinds of helpful information that was specific to the program. So they could talk about the program intelligently. They could answer questions that came up from the workers. The other one, when we first started, we were targeting a limited turf. So the number of facilities were smaller. The cities we were targeting was smaller. So what we did is we actually expanded the list of targets, the cities for our home care, and added additional employers from our skilled nursing facility side. Now, the other challenge actually we faced was virtual program promotion. Prior to the pandemic, we were the type of kind of like real organizing. You knock on doors and build a relationship with workers. You may need to return several times until they realize you're not a scam. You're truly from an organization that's offering something that's beneficial for them. We're not selling anything. Now you take that away and all of a sudden you're doing it virtually. It creates a new set of challenges. So what we did is we created a landing page that provides program overview with an inquiry form. So if someone finds it on a flyer or a coworker recommends it, they have at least really general information prior to reaching out to us. Earlier, Peter shared a flyer with QR codes. I think with the pandemic, a lot of us, even those with limited digital literacy skills, have become really comfortable with QR codes. So it's a really great way to link a site with more information. So that way your flyer is not crowded with all this text and images. And then partnership was also talked about by a few of the panel members here, really ongoing communication and program promotion with partners. We work with the entire CIE 2015 staff members, from the leadership to the field staff. So that way they have a copy of the flyer. They're posting the flyer at the facilities. They are aware of the overview of the program. We're communicating with our employers. On the skilled nursing facility side, there are administrators, director of staff development, kitchen supervisors, any supervisor at the facility. Because the training is open to all job classifications, we reach out, we let them know they're aware. And we know from our experience, a supervisor telling their employee to take a class, the likelihood of them signing up is a lot higher than if we are asking them to take a class. There's almost like this obligation of like, oh, if my supervisor told me, I need to do this. And we also make sure the materials are translated into Spanish. So that way the workers who are going to take our Spanish classes have all the information they need. Now, the other challenge we faced was identifying eligible participants. On the home care side, what we did that was really helpful for us was recruit from the past graduates, those that actually had experience with us, knew relatively, even though some of them may have taken a class a few years ago, they knew who we are, or we had to remind them, and it would, they would recall. So that, I think, helped in sort of making it sort of a warm call instead of completely a cold call where they had no idea who we were. And I think that engagement and experience with our past programs and familiarity with our organization and even staff kind of helped ease and help us, with a smooth recruitment. Another piece that we did, a tool that I highly recommend, instead of, going on the Calenviro site and putting in the address of every single worker or employer, we did a mass pre-screening using this tool called ArcGIS. It's a software. And it was a really great way for us to upload the data for workers and then match it with the census tract. And it gave us the, based on the caregiver's home or facility address, with a pre-approved recruitment list that our staff could use. A few other challenges we faced, I mentioned earlier, was digital literacy. As you all know, CalJobs forms are complex. There are a lot of questions. Our workers were not used to disclosing so much private and sensitive information. It's the first time we have so many questions we need to ask and collect. And some of it, those that have had experience would ask, why do you need all this personal information from me? So it helped us to share that, this is a government, right, EDD site that is collecting the information, and we are not housing this information. We don't need this. It's for the program requirements. And also, I mentioned the skilled nursing facility worker hours. It's a 24-hour facility. Workers may be put on a 7 to 3 p.m. schedule, 3 to 11 p.m. schedule. Their schedule changes all the time. And also the stress and the workload that comes with being a caregiver in a nursing home, we needed to accommodate for that. So what we did was, instead of asking the workers to go on the CalJobs site and navigate the really difficult forms and the step-by-step, we pulled those questions into our own simple enrollment form. We send it to them via Salesforce. They complete it at their own leisure whenever they want. Some of them may take 20 minutes, others may take hours, others may take days, and that's okay. Once they complete it, the only time in the initial stages, our team may reach back out to them is to really maybe verify some information or fill in any missing data that is not there. Or else we know if they work, several, they do have, many of them have multiple jobs. And so getting a hold of them on the phone and asking them questions for hours will definitely not work for us. And then our team takes that information from the Salesforce form and transfers it into the CalJobs and WIOA applications on participants' behalf. And then what we also do is on Salesforce, we store the state ID from CalJobs. So that way, a few data points that we would like to have on our database, we're able to have that unique identifier and transfer the information from CalJobs into our database. I mentioned the complicated and new process, even for our field team, right? We solve the issue with workers having a simpler form, but then our staff needs to navigate the CalJobs and WIOA applications. Our team created a step-by-step roadmap for both field and program team, and really detailed information, helpful tips, troubleshooting, anything we kind of learn along the way. We keep adding it to that document, so that way we have up-to-date roadmap for our team to use. And wraparound services, definitely on the nursing home side, this is no secret. Wraparound services are really critical to help workers not only get to the training, to help them stay in the training and complete the program successfully. We transitioned our confirmation letters to be sent electronically. We do ongoing communication, multiple reminders prior to class start, when class is happening, any reminders they need for quizzes, surveys, homework, assignments, they are constantly getting information from us. So we know if someone's working until 3 p.m., they come off work, they can get our message and take care of what's needed. And then really tailoring the program to the needs of the workers. Even though home care and nursing home workers are caregivers, they each have different needs. And so we make sure that if maybe nursing home workers need a little bit of that friendly nudge more frequently than our home care workers, we make sure we do that. Now, just the last slide talking about our pilot, the first round of classes. We had over 100 workers who went through the program and they graduated. And we have 2 workers who shared their feedback. One of them was from our nursing home side. She's a CNA, and she said that I learned the impact of climate change on poor people and rich people, the homeless, and those living in urban areas. The effect on each of them is different. And then one of our home care workers mentioned that after the class, my consumer and I went over our evacuation plan in case something happened. We talked about what we need to do and who we need to contact. So that is it. I'm happy to take any questions now or later. Thank you so much.
That's just great, Susanna. After all of these presentations, I don't have any socks left. All my socks have been, I put them back on, they get knocked off again. What a great set of panelists. And we're going to, Adine Foreman with the Hospitality Training Academy is going to take us home. Adine's been doing this work for a very long time. She's the executive director of the academy, and she's got really deep experience in a lot of high road specialties. But one of the things we wanted her to highlight today is her deep work with community-based organizations. And so we're going to start Adine's presentation with a cool video that she has. Andrew, can you fire up the Hospitality Training Academy video for us?
I went to prison, and when I came out, I found this AJCC program that has a program that's called Prison to Employment. And through them, they connected me with HTA. When I was first told that I was accepted to the program, I was very excited because I had built up all this energy from taking those Zoom classes, and now I knew it was going to be hands-on.
This program has changed my life in a very drastic way because, as we know, taking these courses in any college is expensive, and to know that the fact that you don't have to pay for it here, it's amazing.
I've learned a lot in this culinary school. I just love the fact that the chefs are so hands-on and how much experience that they come with, and I really love the fact how HTA provides the genuineness in it. You really feel like you have a family.
We're here to make a difference with these students and how we're going to change them from not knowing what they wanted or unsure about their culinary abilities to competent, really good prep cooks and line cooks. In fact, we'll almost guarantee that any of our members here will leave and become a very good employee.
This program changed my life with my family. It changed my life personally. I'm a better cook. I'm a better father, I think, and teaching my kid that I'm going to school and it's a good thing to go to school. So he goes to school and gives it 100% every day, just like Daddy does.
It's not just about cooking. It's a method to the madness here. It's math that goes with cooking. It's prep. It's time management. It's a lot to go along with cooking. It ain't just putting pot on the stove.
I wanted to become a cook because I've always been surrounded by the kitchen. My dad was a cook. He's currently a cook at where I'm working as a steward at the Beverly Hilton. And before him, his mom was a cook in a little restaurant in Mexico. And his uncle was a cook at the same hotel. Thankfully, with the experience I've gained here, I'm going to try to become a cook at the Beverly Hilton. I want to move into that. It's kind of been a rite of passage for my family.
One of the biggest things I've learned from here is it is technical. It is the math, all the different aspects that cooking takes. Being fast, having that sense of urgency, get it done, but also be right on with the recipes.
If you ever have the opportunity to do this program, it is a phenomenal program that will help you succeed in life, give you your everyday tools. It's like they see your flaws, but at the same time, they help you succeed. They want you to succeed, and they're not going to set you up for failure.
It's really hard to find somebody that you look at and you actually agree that they care about what you're doing. And I'm really selling them on that sincerity. I just naturally let them know I care about how it's going to come out and how you do it to make it come out.
I think what HTA and Chef Danny has provided us is a very soft bed to land on when we fall down or when we make mistakes. A place for us to not be too scared to try to mess it up.
I have a union job now at the Sheraton Universal, and I'm really excited for this phase of my life.
Thanks to HTA, I got into the proper hotel in Santa Monica. It took the best of me to get hired there. They are a very prestigious company. They are looking for the best of the best, and HTA got me there.
All right, Aideen, that's fantastic. The video itself is probably a great recruiting tool, but can you tell us a little bit about how you recruit all these fantastic students, especially in this tight labor market and especially in hospitality? Oh, you're on mute, my friend.
So thank you, Pam. And I really, a lot has been covered already, and I know it's late and I don't want to repeat much of the great advice. I particularly liked the great reshuffling because I think that's really true. I mean, and so I would say two things. One is that a lot of it is the obvious work, right? There's all these community-based organizations that have clients, whether they're domestic violence shelters, whether they are homeless organizations, whether they are whatever they are. And just like Armando talked about how to, create relationships with AJCCs, right? You just got to create these relationships. You got to make sure that those organizations are good and providing quality services, right? And can communicate and have case managers that can communicate with your case managers. And, we give our case managers 24 hours to respond back to anybody. And so we appreciate that same kind of responsiveness for anybody we work with. We like to, when we partner with an organization, we like to speak to sort of management about expectations and that partnership, particularly in HRTP, where we fund organizations, we fund AJCCs for outreach, we fund African American and other organizations to do outreach for us. So it's really our goal to make sure that we're collaborating, but at a high level, right? We just don't want to throw the money out there and hope that we're getting people out of it. We want to make sure that our money is creating this partnership, a deep partnership with collaborative efforts. The other thing I would really say is, there's always, we can't get through the discussion on, the great resignation or reshuffling or whatever it is without talking about hospitality and retail. And everybody will say, there's a shortage of this, a shortage of that. The truth is that we don't have a problem getting cooks for the Four Seasons or the Ritz-Carlton. They have great union contracts with a great benefit package, with legal fund and a pension fund. It's not hard to find people who want to work for $28 or more an hour. And so what's happening is people that we have at our lower level properties, right? We are upskilling. We are taking dishwashers to cooks. We are doing that and placing them at the best properties. What's happening though is the places that aren't paying very much, right, are the ones suffering because people are like, hey, I can go get paid more right now because there's a shortage. So you're seeing sort of the mom and pop restaurants having the shortages. You're certainly seeing the places that are paying under the table and, not really those great jobs, having the difficulty. I would say that people are now getting smarter and seeing, we're seeing Taco Bell's with sign and Del Tacos with signs saying we're paying $20 an hour. Somebody saw a donut shop saying they're paying $20 an hour with a giant banner across it. So I guess my argument is that in the hospitality and retail sector, it's coming back, it's slow. Our properties are at about 70% of what they used to be. Now it's summer and we're starting to see a big uptake on our properties against the water, but the ones more downtown are having the problems because that's a lot of conferences and conventions, which is, was doing great. And all of a sudden LA County started spiking above 10,000 cases a day. And we started to see it drop again, right? So it's all dependent on what's going on with COVID, but there is a movement to get those folks in the lower level union jobs into the higher level union jobs, which means that we're going to deplete those employers that are paying the lower amounts. So then the argument is, well, you want to be competitive, right? What are you going to do? Pay more. You get more people. So that's really what we're seeing. We are doing everything we can to meet the shortage, which means that we used to lower our class size even down to 8, so we have people distanced. But right now, our employers are so hungry for cooks that we have moved our classes back up to 18 and above to try and really fill that need. But it really is an effort to find people from all over the community. The accelerator programs are a blessing because they let us do outreach along with HRTP, partnering with the AJCCs, getting people the supportive services. We have a lot of people that need glasses. That's a big thing for people who want to be cooks. If you can't see the food and you're handling knives, it's a little freaking scary. So it is those partnerships that help people with the non-skid shoes, the glasses, all of that we really like. But it goes back in our side to that trusting partnership and creating that can withstand the long haul, that people don't start ghosting our case managers, all that weird stuff that makes you go, what is wrong with them? So I guess, Pam, I would try to make this short and sweet. That's what I would sort of say.
That's perfect. It's really a long game, right? Nobody's going to solve this problem instantly. And your lesson is that long-standing infrastructure has allowed you to support your industry in a way that because you have deep knowledge of the industry and deep relationships, you're able to pivot and address these kinds of economic shocks.
I would say that. I would also say the one warning is know who you're getting. In Unite Here, there's a big campaign about, sleep with the right people, right? That's our Pride campaign. And I would say that goes to community-based organizations. Collaborate with the right organizations. Make sure that they're at the level you're comfortable with.
Super. Great advice. Great information. Thank you very much. And so our final panelist was going to be Tonya Burke with the California Workforce Development Board's HRTP field team. And Tonya got called to another meeting, so she's not going to be able to join us. We've pushed it to the end. We don't have a whole lot of time left for questions because the presentations were so rich. But let's quickly open it up for questions. Those of us who can hang out a little late and answer questions or ask and answer questions, please do. Any questions from the floor or comments? I'm guessing lots of requests for the materials that people shared.
Hi, Katia Lopez here, representing the LEAP Institute. I wanted to ask about the advertisement materials. Are those all created in-house, or do you have to work with other, digital creators or media content creators, etc.?
Great question. Anybody want to share how they develop their materials? Aideen?
So we have a graphic designer. And so we get everybody's logos because, every time we do something, there's always, all these logo rules. And if you do something with DOL, you got to get the right language. But we gather that all for her. And then we give her the basic information of what the flyer should say. We really have our color. Our color is, we are very clear on what our messaging looks like. A lot of our flyers have to have this sort of the same theme. And then she takes it from there.
And is that contractor or in-house staff?
It is contracted out.
Okay. Anybody else?
And then we have a very high level graphic designer for like pamphlets and booklets.
Anybody else want to comment on how they?
We have an in-house communication department, and we also use the platform Canva. And as Dean mentioned, we have our sort of like branding colors that we always use, and then have like certain things like making sure that the word free is there so the workers know. So just a few things that are constantly showing up on our flyers so the workers know it's coming from our organization.
Great. Okay. Other questions, comments, or insights?
I had a quick
Michael?
question.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thanks, Michael.
This is for anybody and everybody can answer this, but is there any data on employer incentives in addition to healthcare, retirement, that involve transportation or childcare support from the employer or paid for by the employer? Something that I've been exploring here in Sacramento with one of our anchor employers on incorporating that as part of their recruiting strategy.
Great question. Creative approach to removing barriers and improving job.
So we did a microtransit project through HRTP of driving workers to and from work, and are looking to do another one of those projects with USC because it was so successful and the workers really enjoyed it. We're looking to do it particularly out of South Central, where it's kind of a good job wasteland and the union jobs are, far away, and people would have to take 2 buses and transfer, and it could be a 2 to 2.5 hour commute. So we're looking for ways to get funding and starting this project with USC probably in the fall with their Unite Here Local 11 workers.
Excellent, thank you. And that's managed by your organization?
It is managed by our organization, and then we contract out to a company. It's like Primetime Shuttle that has, the vans that take people to the airport so that their drivers can do this and then go on to do their airport driving. And then at the end of the day, come back and pick up the workers and drive them home.
Right. Sweet. Okay.
Cool.
Terrific. Any other creative incentives that people have seen employers are offering?
I mean, Pam, there's lots of bonuses we're seeing in our industry, especially, sign here, work 3 months, get $1,000 bonus.
Right. A lot of that.
And without the long-term infrastructure, the ability to collectively bargain, those tend to go away when the crisis is over, right? So we've got, fortunately, HRTPs have that sort of structural approach to figuring out how they can push up job quality and keep it up. Yeah. Other questions or comments? We're a minute over. Well, Armando?
On Michael's question, I think it's a great question. Also, another opportunity for individuals like ourselves who are working directly with participants to give employers these recommendations or these ideas, because in many cases, employers do not know what would benefit the workers that we're working with. So, Michael, I think it's a great opportunity for us as a workforce professionals, and even for yourself, to be able to think what the workers need, and to be able to provide that to the employers. obviously we introduce our services to the employers, and they like the fact that we're giving stipends, that we're providing transportation assistance, that we're providing uniform reimbursement, but giving them an opportunity to continue those supportive services, A, is one thing, but B, also letting them know what are the needs of the workers that we're serving. That would potentially give them an opportunity to think outside the box as to what they can provide to their future workforce.
For sure. I'm definitely going to collect data on the target communities that we're engaging, but also their existing workforce. There's an opportunity to reduce the barrier for transportation for that employer, for those employees. So definitely love to compare notes when I get that, for sure.
The only thing I would add to the discussion on this is that there is a commuter benefits literature that shows that when employers provide parking benefits or transportation subsidies, that they tend to provide bigger subsidies to the higher income workers and lower subsidies to the lower income workers. So just to say that, any of those incentives should ensure that they're the equity of the workers, and that the ones who need it the most are actually receiving the subsidy rather than.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, the program we're piloting is only targeting production folk and the ones that don't have 2 cars at their house already.
Particularly valuable in demonstrating the value of high road partnerships, right? Because Michael, you're able to, as Armando pointed out and you pointed out, bring worker wisdom to the table by asking workers what they need and then sharing that with employers, because you've built the infrastructure that allows for that sharing of information, and then bringing in the kind of research that Enrique just mentioned to make sure that the benefits of this work don't accrue to just the top folks or to the employer's benefit, but that they actually accrue to the workers' benefit, building that strength there. So great examples of the value of this infrastructure as a problem-solving mechanism.
Question.
Michelle?
Susanna, you mentioned using GIS to help you identify where potential participants are. Can you just share a little bit more about that? Because that sounds interesting.
Sure, I would love to the best of my knowledge, since I'm not the one actually doing the work. What I understand our team does is they take the list of workers that we are gonna pull from, they upload the list into the ArcGIS software, and then it matches with the census tract information, and it gives us this pre-approved list. And then I believe the additional steps are, there is additional requirements by CalEnviro data, like you have to be from DAC or LIH communities, and one of them has to be a yes. And then it's a little bit manual work involved in having that final approved list. But what I understand is this takes maybe max a few hours versus entering the addresses one by one to understand or to determine if a specific worker or workers from a facility will be eligible to participate in the program. So it's really an efficient way of getting a pre-approved list.
That is great. I really think GIS could also be helpful to identify where the employers are. In your case with IHSS, I think it's more difficult because they might go into homes but if you just had nursing homes, you can see where are the participants, where are the nursing homes, so that we can reduce the barrier of not having transportation to get to their job. I think GIS is the future.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Terrific exchanges. Okay, so I know we're over time, but any other burning questions or comments? It just was a terrific panel. What a great bunch of resources you all shared. Thank you all so much for your wisdom, and we're just going to keep pulling together groups like this to have this conversation. These are some of the kinds of conversations that come out of our monthly community check-ins. So thank you all very, very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you,
Pam.
Great.